If you'd like more videos made on the Khabib vs Tony fight, then be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Anticipated UFC 249 video series here on KENAN TV. In episode 1, let's talk about Tony Ferguson and how he could defeat Khabib Nurmagomedov. In the following episode, I will talk about how Khabib could defeat Tony, so be sure to subscribe to see that. So with that being said, let's jump right into the video. Looking at Khabib Nurmagomedov, he is virtually one fight away from being crowned the greatest lightweight the UFC has ever seen. However though, that final opponent which could really claim him that title is not short from being considered that himself. And that fighter is Tony Ferguson, in my opinion the most well-rounded fighter in the lightweight division, and of course the most well-rounded fighter Khabib Nurmagomedov will ever face. Throughout the course of Khabib's 28-0 MMA career, but more did complete MMA fighters that could pose a threat to Khabib in all areas of the game. Many of his opponents were predominant strikers. For example, if you take a look at Michael Johnson, Edson Barboza, Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, these fighters were predominant strikers. Even though some may have had black belts in judo or BJJ here and there, it doesn't really compete with Khabib's level of grappling, and they themselves never really presented their ground game as a very viable option of defeating their opponent. There has only been so far Tony Ferguson who could also live up to that expectation of finishing and really dominating their opponents on the mat. And for the people who may think to themselves, well, if you take a look at Tony Ferguson, the more time that passes by, and currently he's 36 years old, you would have to believe that at some point he's going to start declining. And to that I will say, yes, perhaps that is true, but the severity of the decline and deterioration of Tony Ferguson isn't going to be as drastic as it would have been compared to a fighter who really depends on youth on their style. For example, Conor McGregor, I would have to believe he has to really rely on a lot of reflexes, timing, and things of that nature, speed along the way as well. As he gets older, those things will decline. However, if you take a look at Tony Ferguson, his style isn't based around timing, reflexes, speed, things of that nature. He's not really solely dependent on that. He can base his style a lot more on variety, arsenal, activity, and pure overall skill instead of just pure athleticism. And because of that, the more time that goes by, the more that Tony Ferguson will win and the more experience he will get, the better he will get over time. He's kind of aging like fine wine. And because of that, I will have to say that age or deterioration or declining in performance will not be something Tony Ferguson will be too much affected by. Now with these 3 general thinking points out of the way, let's dive a little bit more into depth on why Tony Ferguson's style could defeat Khabib's. Taking a look at Tony Ferguson's style, you can compare it to a snowball that just keeps on expanding and growing as it collects more and more snow over its trajectory. And looking at Tony Ferguson, you can kind of compare that to his damage overall, but also the consistency and the tempo at which he's collecting the damage at. So as the fights start off and Tony Ferguson's game is the fact that he's not that good at taking pressure. I believe calm pressure is just the weakness of Khabib Nurmagomedov. Early on in the fight, Khabib is not going to be able to find his range. So because he can't find his footing in the early fight, he will be against Michael Johnson very fatal. Let us first analyze a few first round openings in Khabib's career. Let's start by looking at the Pat Healy fight. The reason why I'm bringing this fight up is because even 70 years ago, the little tendencies and just the nature of Khabib's overall style and his stand-up particularly really comes down to these 2 things, and even to this day still remain relevant. From the opening of the fight, Khabib is inclined to take the outside. The main reason as to why this is the case is because Khabib really wants to keep a leg kick distance between him and his opponent, because at that range, he can see a leg kick coming, he can see the jab coming, he can see most of the punches coming, and by just using footwork he can just get out of the way. However though, like I said, against Tony Ferguson, this will just give Tony Ferguson the space he needs to just keep backing up Khabib. And defensively speaking, Khabib still does the same things. He just kind of uses footwork to keep that distance going, post up on your opponent if they really come in a bit too close, because in terms of counter takedowns when the opponent is coming at him, he doesn't really do them all too much. And particularly in this matchup, it was very interesting because Khabib was able to not only shoot him for 2 takedowns, when he shot him for the takedowns, Pat Healy was coming at him, but when he did take him down or try to bring him down, he turned the opponent around and put him against the fence, and he did this twice, even though when Khabib could have easily pulled Healy to the mats and established ground control from there. The reason why he does this is very interesting. He does this because he does not really want to be ending up in a situation where the opponent can pull half guard or full guard. And for example, against Tony Ferguson, if I'm Khabib, I don't want to be ending up in half or full guard with him. And because of this, Khabib turned Healy around and put him against the fence and then started to pull him downward to the mat. It's very interesting how much Khabib really prefers to take these opponents down against the fence. And I will get to why that is really a big priority for Khabib later down in this video. And also one thing that was very interesting and very out of character for Khabib was the fact that he let go of Healy twice when he had him pinned up against the cage. I don't know what you can make of it. Perhaps the moment got to him, but it was very out of character in my opinion. But obviously this was 7 years ago. So since then, Khabib has probably really refined his takedown offense when it comes to shooting in, and he has definitely improved his striking. He has become very crisp with his jab and things of that nature, but in general, the tendencies that you saw here with footwork and taking the outside and defense still remain relevant today. Now let's take a couple quick looks at how fights start off with Khabib against, for example, Dustin, Michael Johnson, Conor, Quinta. Just throughout all of these years, those tendencies still remain the same, and I believe that will be a very big key in order for Tony Ferguson to start defeating Khabib, especially in the early fights where he can start to put in damage and really start to gas out Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now, aside from that, this approach for Tony Ferguson is not only his nature of fighting, so both of their natures colliding is just going to be ending up in the favor of Tony Ferguson because he just likes to do what I just explained is the weakness of Khabib. However, aside from that, at the same time, the main reason why this will always be a very viable option is because at that range, as he's coming forward, his offense will also be treated as defense. More specifically, takedown defense gets stuffed or it will get transitioned into a submission. And this will either make Khabib gun shy, he will not shoot him for that takedown, it will really make him feel closed in, and then perhaps the more and more losing or the idea of losing can start to set in. So desperation will then start to kick in. And we know this, when people start to get desperate, they will start to make mistakes, right? And for Khabib, this can either mean a lot of openings that will be countered, or many desperate takedowns that will be either countered or, transitioned into submissions, which will perhaps end the fight. If, for example, Dustin Poirier can catch Khabib Nurmagomedov in a guillotine, then I'm pretty certain that Tony Ferguson can get an anaconda choke in, or a Darce choke, or a guillotine of his own. And unlike Dustin Poirier, Tony Ferguson, he has tremendous cardio, he has tremendous grappling cardio. He's not as really bulky as Tony Ferguson, so he can have a lot more cardio, he can really endure and really get a lot more squeeze in his submission because he is taller, rangier, he has longer arms, he can get the torque in, he can get the leverage in, and he can finish submissions a lot better in my opinion than Dustin Poirier could have. We will focus on grappling in this fight later down in this video, but let's bring the fight back up for a quick second. All the points that I brought up really point to one thing, and that is the fact that in this matchup, the ring general will be Tony Ferguson. He will set the pace, he will set the distance, and he will just set everything that usually Khabib really doesn't have to deal with all too much. Because we haven't seen Khabib keep up with somebody else's pace ever, really. Perhaps for a couple of seconds, but then he starts to take control once again. And then you have to ask yourself the question, can Tony Ferguson gas Khabib out? And in my opinion, yes he can. We have seen against, for example, Pat Healy, when the fight started off and they were both swinging punches and it was a really active fight, that you could see Khabib visibly taking in big breaths. And against Tony Ferguson, the more you start to breathe in, the more you will start to get teeth kicked to the belly. And why is really this the case? Why did Khabib start to really take in a lot more oxygen? Why did he have to inhale a lot harder from the beginning of the fight? Well, obviously they just fought, right? But more importantly is the fact that Khabib, his body, his anatomy is really based on fast twitch muscles. Just very twitchy, very explosive, and these will not only be faster than Tony Ferguson for sure, but also more powerful. But the downside is that they will not be able to keep up that tempo. They will start to fatigue a lot faster, and this is Khabib's anatomy, this is his body. You cannot really change the way he is built, and this is why you see a lot of times Khabib does not shoot him for big explosive takedowns. He does not do anything that is very out there anymore. At least he's very dependent on the jab, he's very structured, he's very mechanical. He will start to proceed to really back you up and then chain grapple you against the fence, bring one leg up, take you down, things of that nature. He will not be the type of fighter George St. Pierre was, for example, with his wrestling. And because of this, in order to pace himself for 5 rounds, he will take the opponents down and he will control them, he will start to beat them up, but at that same time he is taking a break while still working. That is the most important part of it all, because just taking you down is one portion of the entire setup, right? Once you're down, trying to advance to a powerful position is also wasting that energy. If you can take the opponent down against the fence, you essentially get a 2-for-1 bonus. You can take him down and you can pretty much neutralize them right away. Because even if you are Tony Ferguson, who is a black belt in 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, when you get pinned up against the fence and Khabib is sitting on your legs and tying down your arms, there is literally nothing else that you can do from that point. You're just going to get mauled. Simple as that. And that is why that method of taking people down is very effective for Khabib. But coming back to the original point of Tony Ferguson being able to gas out Khabib, yes, he can gas him out. If the fight can continue to stay on the feet for about 2-3 minutes, then Khabib will start to really slowly start to decline, because as the more punches are being traded and as the more pressure is being put on Khabib, the more desperate he will get, the more mistakes he will make, the more he will shoot in, and the quicker he will get tired. And the quicker he is tired, the more telegraphed his shoot-ins will be, and the easier they will be to defend. And this can all happen and unfold in the first 2 rounds, really guys. This is going to be a very fast procedure if Tony Ferguson can be successful with this. And as soon as he can get him tired, well, then it's a wrap. Tony Ferguson can submit Khabib Nurmagomedov himself. Either Khabib will tap or he will get choked out. But the reality is that Tony Ferguson can, and really, you guys need to understand how much of a reality this is, if Tony Ferguson can implement a perfect game plan that can really keep Khabib busy and not really let him get in the fight. And he can do that, and he is arguably the only guy that can do this for 5 rounds straight. And like I said in the beginning of the video, there's like a snowball effect with him. He will get better as these rounds go by, and what you see in the first round will only be a quick glimpse of what can happen and unfold in the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th round. So he's a very dangerous fighter, and this is exactly why this fight can determine who the greatest lightweight of all time can be. But we focused a lot on the stand-up striking part of this video. Let's dive in a bit more into detail as to what will happen in the grappling department and why Tony Ferguson can pose a threat also in the grappling department that many opponents really never could. Ferguson is not only the guy to pose a submission threat from the bottom, but also damage. He will keep you active, he will elbow you, he will set you up at all times, and he will keep you busy, always guessing, and you will never really find a spot for you to rest and completely neutralize the opponent. He has very long arms, very long legs, and he will use it to his full potential. And like I said in the previous part of this video, Khabib will have a very hard time backing up Tony Ferguson. I don't really see it happening all too much. And because of this, Tony Ferguson can really either expect Khabib to shoot in on him for a single leg and then drive him against the cage, which is a very realistic way for him to get taken down with, or Khabib can flurry Tony Ferguson, rush him with flying knees, things of that nature, and then back him up against the fence and then take him down like that. But either way, I believe in this matchup, the likelihood of Tony Ferguson not being backed up or put up against the fence is very unlikely, because I believe it will happen at some point. But when will it happen, right? Or if it will happen, because you never know in this fight game. But the likelihood of Tony Ferguson being able to back up Khabib is just a lot more likely than that happening, or it is a lot more viable, it is a lot more consistent, and then there's a lot more of a logical way for the fight to play out. Because the average fight time, or the average time Tony is on the offense or Khabib is on the offense, will really come down to the fact that Tony Ferguson is going to be having a lot more offensive time and a lot more front foot time against Khabib. So that is why I believe it will be a very hard time for Khabib to bring down Tony Ferguson to the mat. And people may think to themselves, look at Kevin Lee was able to take down Tony Ferguson. Well, they are two completely different fighters. Kevin Lee is a lot more of an explosive wrestler than Khabib. Like I said, Khabib is a lot more dependent on chain wrestling and then bringing you down against the fence. Kevin Lee can shoot in on you and bring you down just like that, quick, just like a very explosive wrestler does. And then we saw what happened on the bottom. Yeah, sure, Kevin Lee was able to establish mount for a quick second, but after that, we saw what happened. Tony Ferguson kept on working, was able to put him in full guard, started landing his elbows, and started setting up submissions, keeping him busy. And that is exactly why I highly doubt Khabib will try to shoot him for a takedown that can take Tony Ferguson down, but not against the cage. Let's just assume he takes him down in the middle of the octagon. That is a very disadvantageous position to be in compared to the fence, because then Tony Ferguson will start throwing his elbows. He will do all of these things. He can perhaps also scramble back up, which could be a very viable option for him. I believe he's a very good scrambler, and I believe cardio-wise he can do it consistently. So generally speaking, if Khabib takes Tony Ferguson down anywhere but against the fence, it will be a very hard time for Khabib to control him, and that is something we haven't really seen all too much. And as soon as Tony Ferguson can pop back up after 2 or 3 takedowns still, and then get himself some momentum once again, then it will be a very, very hard time for Khabib to get back into the fight and get some success once again. Because then, as soon as the fight gets back up, Tony Ferguson will pressure him. He will back him up, and if Khabib tries to shoot him for a takedown, it can be met with a submission, and this time around, because he's a lot more tired, it can be a lot more easier for him to get submitted. So in general, Tony Ferguson can fight well coming forward. He can fight well on the back foot. He can fight better at that medium range that Khabib likes to fight at, because Tony Ferguson does have the height advantage, I believe, also reach advantage, or just in general, he just fights a lot longer than Khabib does, and this will really play in his favor. So at that medium range Khabib likes to be in, Tony Ferguson can land those teep kicks, he can push him back, he can really throw in those jabs, those elbows, things of that nature. A lot of unorthodox shots that Khabib cannot really see coming, and it will really come down to instinct. And we've seen Khabib's instinct, he's not really that offensive in the stand-up department, and just by nature alone, he will probably start backing up. And once he does that, Tony Ferguson can start to gain a lot more momentum. And aside from that also, on the mats, on the ground, Tony Ferguson fights hard. He fights as hard as he does in stand-up on the floor. So I think this is really the most important fight in the lightweight division's history, and I believe we will be getting a very tremendous fight come fight night. And I really look forward to seeing who will win come fight night. If you'd like to know who I think will win come fight night, then be sure to wait out for episode number 3 for the ultimate breakdown on this fight, which will be released the day of UFC 249. But for now, leave in the comment section down below who you think will win come fight night. As always, I've been Kenan from KENAN KTV, signing off. Later.